a long time. I stay with you. Thank you.
Okay.
It's a nice
Okay.
discussion.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
Raina,
Thank
we
you.
want you back to do a special on Malaysia, specifically
Okay,
on
thank you.
Malaysia, because a lot of our viewers, you're getting a lot of these people that you've seen. Yeah, they know about Malaysia, but let me tell you,
Oh
there's a lot of
yeah.
people in the United States who have never heard of it. They
Obviously,
can't find it on a map. So we're going to bring you
definitely.
back to do a special on Malaysia. Okay.
Yeah, and I want to see everyone in Malaysia. Definitely, we will arrange a very good party for you. Here, delicious food, delicious, like everything is very beautiful. Hopefully, you will
Yeah.
enjoy.
We're
Thank
going to
you.
have a party in
Thank
Kuala
you.
Lumpur as soon as this is over with. I'm
Yes.
getting my tickets.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
For a discount. All right. We'll
Thank you.
see you back.
Thank you.
All right. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. All right. So now let's see.
So the
Okay.
U.S. has
Ankit.
less than 5% of the world population and about 80% of the attributed deaths. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
I
about
mean,
28%. 28% of the
you know, if
attributed
this was my report card, I was grading this student, I would say that he hadn't done too well, because if you look at the United States, and again, somebody pointed out that you look at deaths per million, and which is the real indicator, and we're looking around 244. But then as I go down to Malaysia, Ankit, if you could scroll down to Malaysia, it's just right past Australia. Okay. It's down a ways here. Okay, wait. Stop. Yeah, as soon as you get to Egypt, I can see it. Look at Malaysia, where Reina is from. The total amount of death is 109. The population is 30 million people. Okay, deaths per million is about half of what it is. Wait, less than that. In the United States, like 3 per million. In other words, they've done a tremendous job. So has Australia in terms of containing the coronavirus. Why is it?
Well, go to Hong Kong. Go look at Hong
Yeah,
Kong.
Hong Kong, right? Yeah, Rakesh is here. He was on earlier today. But
Or maybe the fairest one to go to is South Korea, because they reported their first confirmed case the same way the U.S. did. And I think you're going to see about 260 deaths in South Korea, which would translate in the U.S., adjusted for population, to about 1,600 instead of 81,000.
Right, exactly. And then see that's the math I was looking at, David. I was saying, if you look at the math, our numbers are way high. I mean, we're astronomically higher than some of these other countries that we've had on our show. Because Rakesh is showing me, hey, Hong Kong doesn't have hardly any. Malaysia, Reina just came from Malaysia. They don't have hardly any, and same with Willie Hill from Australia. And then we look at the United States, we're like way up there. So
we're beyond way up there. We're like leaders 100 times more than anyone else.
Okay, so is we have I got two people put on the spot. We have Dr. Ratner. Is this a failure of our medical community or failure of our leadership? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I would say a little of both. You know, if you take a look at South Korea, there was a point at which they were doing 50,000 tests a day. And without the data that we really need, it makes it difficult to contain the virus. So why is it we have not been able to test our population? I think this is a core challenge. Nick, you probably have opinions about whether this is medical or political or both. What do you think?
Wait. You want to know what I think?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay. About why we're a complete abject failure in the well, one thing I do know, because I just look at data, and the thing is, the data shows we're the most expensive healthcare system in the world. Okay, the data shows that the coronavirus, we are one of the highest in terms of amount, but not the highest per million population. And I think what happened is, looking at just the data, and see, the real problem with data, Dr. Reckner, is, you don't ever get, and Terry can tell us this because Terry works with data all the time, you don't get all the right data sometimes the first time. You have to pull the data out, and then sometimes you find it's corrupted, it's not correct. So the data is important. The data,
there's a big difference between data and information.
Yeah, we get information, and sometimes and you got to keep culling through it to find the right. The information that I received, and again, haven't been able to verify that. That's the reason I have people like David Johnson. He actually goes around and he snoops around to find out facts, okay? And no one does that unless you're an investigative reporter, which I'm not, okay? But that, from what I understand, we had a pandemic team out there at one time, and it was dismissed in 2018. Okay, that is not good leadership, whoever did that, because the pandemic, because we had this crazy guy called Bill Gates running around the country doing TED Talks saying, oh, the biggest problem we're going to face, and no one listened to this guy because he doesn't know anything, is a pandemic. And he went to every TED Talk, the biggest thing we're facing is a pandemic. No one listened to him. Okay, so this is blazing out there on TED Talks. Okay, and then there's this pandemic team. In other words, the first response team, which South Korea took very seriously, and we dismissed them completely. And then, and this is a problem I had, the minute now this came about, it's a at that point in time, it is a medical problem. And so who's in charge? Mike Pence, a politician from Indianapolis. Dr. Wagner, if you had a medical condition, are you going to go see your mayor about that? Would you do that? Okay. In other words, you found out that you have a virus or you may have cancer. So you're going to go see the mayor of St. Paul because he's going to help you, right? Wrong.
Well, it's very interesting because we are letting medical choices be made by politicians. It's sort of like the politics legislating third trimester abortion. I mean, who should make the decision about when elective cases should resume? So this line between what's good for a community and what the best medical choice is, it's not clear to me. Those decisions are really in the right hands.
Yeah, and see, for me, and maybe because you asked my opinion, if I have a medical condition or there's a medical problem, the first thing our leader would point to would not be the vice president. I'm sure he's a great vice president. At least half the country thinks so, or maybe less. I would point to, here's my team, and I'd have a whole stack of medical doctors. Look, I mean, a whole stack of the best and the brightest, like David
At least infectious disease
medical doctors, and ones that specialize in pathology, specialize in infectious diseases, and I'd have the best and the brightest sitting there. That's the team that's going to deal with this. Okay, not politics.
Next,
I want to ask David, why didn't Donald do this? Because David knows.
well,
David,
I
why did Donald do
predicted
this?
I predicted in my biography of Trump that if we had a pandemic, or as I put it, a virus hopscotching around the globe on jetliners,
Yes.
that he would be absolutely incapable of handling this.
You put
And
that in your book?
Hmm?
You put that in the book before this happened?
yeah,
Really?
Yeah.
I can read the book
And-
again.
well, when I was in college in the 60s, one of the things I studied with a bunch of bureaucrats, because I knew I was going to be writing about government, so I wanted to learn how they're taught, was the fact that we were going to have another pandemic. We had one in 57, 58 when Eisenhower was president. It was rather minor. And we've had several dry runs in this century, or small runs. But Trump did more than just allow John Bolton to get rid of the pandemic team in the White House and the national security staff. The outgoing administration ran a series of training exercises for the incoming administration. That happens every time we change presidents. And one of the training exercises was how to deal with a pandemic. They wrote a guidebook for them. Here's how to deal with a pandemic.
Right.
Obviously, that had no impact. And let me tell you the news that Bloomberg just broke while we were speaking. Bloomberg had reporters go through the death data in New York City for a number of years. New York City in the spring should have had, and remember the first recorded deaths in New York weren't until February.
Right.
New York should have had 8,000 deaths in the first 3 months of this year. It had 32,000, 4 times as many. The number of deaths we're reporting is a serious undercount of the actual level of death, and it'll be probably several years before we get accurate counts. But the 81,000 number, rounding it, for as of yesterday for the U.S. is obviously quite low. Based on other data I've read and some work done by 2 guys who write for DC Report and are numbers nuts, it seems to be pretty clear that the count at this point is over 120,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but and see, I believe in what I call the ringer theory. Okay, if you're a gamer, you believe in what they call the ringer. So, and I learned that a long time ago when I was in college. There was a chess tournament I wanted to win called the Pan American Intercollegiate. We didn't have the talent at the University of South Florida to do it, so I got scholarshiped 2 of the best players in the Larry Christensen, Ron Henley, we won it. Then I was playing trivia up in Whatcom County, okay? And we could never win this trivia contest. I brought a guy in called Ken Jennings, okay, who, by the way, if you ever found Ken,
Jeopardy.
okay, Ken knows me really well. Okay, because I called him up. I said, Ken, I'm having this big problem. I can't win this trivia tournament. Can you come and play on our team? So Ken comes in from Seattle because he had moved back from Salt Lake to Seattle and played on our trivia team. Lo and behold, we won the trivia tournament.
What around, Nick? Did you track that deck or what?
Then I wanted to win a foosball tournament, okay? And I was good, but I wasn't that great. So I brought in this guy, Carl Miller, who was world foosball champion. We won the foosball tournament. When you want to win something, you find the best person that you can and bring them on your team to support your team going forward. And I'm sorry, Mike Pence may be a great governor. He may be you may love him. Whoever's out there loves him. Good for you. Okay, but he is not a medical doctor. He's the wrong person to have on your medical team. Wrong guy leading it.
Leaders, you don't have to have a vice president as a medical doctor.
Yeah,
as a leader, you hire the team.
Sure.
You
And the
hire
politicians,
the IT team to build your IT product. You hire the medical
best politicians don't necessarily have to be the best in medical. And even Bill Gates, as smart as this guy is, everybody goes, okay, Bill Gates, and you can see it on the internet, played the world champion, Magnus Carlsen. Okay, it wasn't even close. Magnus slaughtered him in 90 seconds and maybe 9 moves. It was horrible. Okay, Bill Gates may be the best computer guy in the world, maybe 100, but he can't beat a world champion chess player at chess. It's just never going to happen. So what you want to do is bring those people on your team. Then you win. Okay, and that's not what happened.
And Nick, we also had a CDC team in Wuhan that in late November, said there are indications that we have a novel coronavirus that will spread. So the administration was told about that right away. The administration has known since late November. And the problem is that Donald is incapable of processing information that contradicts what he believes. And I've observed this in him as long as I've known him, which is almost 32 years now. If there's something that contradicts what he believes, he has to dismiss it. He has to call it a hoax. He has to say you're a liar. So.
Oh, that must be Donald calling you right now.
Yeah, stop calling me at home.
Because you know we're being watched. So that's probably Donald calling you.
Yeah, that's Donald calling. But what are you
lighten up, buddy? Lighten up, or blah blah blah. Like, But the thing is, unfortunately, the medical situation has become a political and economic situation, and that really bothers me because Dr. Reckner, I would prefer to find the best pathologist, best immunologist, best virologist in the country, and bring them on and have a team of them. I wouldn't have one. I'd have a group of them, and then when you have a question, turn it over to them to answer, not try to be a medical practitioner.
Right, but here's the question today: where do we go from now? Where is that team? How would we put this team together? Because we're not talking about this in history. Here we are going through it right now. What should we do today?
Yeah. Oh no. That's an absolutely good point.
And we have to look at that. We also have to look at who do we want to do it, right? Because right now we're not being led right. Our numbers are way off whack, and I heard some things over the weekend that seriously disturbed me, and part of it was, no, I'm not going to wear a mask. Why should I wear a mask?
Yeah, I don't
care. I don't care that I spread what I have to anyone.
Right. And this is
everyone else is wearing a mask, so why should I?
In the studies I've seen, Dr. Reckner, if I wear a mask and they wear a mask, it's 1.2% probability if one person's infected that I get infected. If one person wears a mask, the other doesn't, it's 5.6. If you don't both wear a mask, you're going to both get sick. I mean, that's what the studies say. And so I wear a mask and I wear gloves. I hate doing it, but the thing is, at the same time, how can I read that study and not?
But it's the data shows that the cultures who followed that practice and enforced it, not just followed it, but enforced it. Because that's what people were telling me over the weekend here in the U.S. was, well, in other countries they penalize you, and they don't penalize us here, so I'm not going to do it. And I'm like, fine, be a spreader. But in other countries that we show data, the death rates are this compared to ours.
Absolutely.
And so this is what we have to look at, not just the data itself, but the culture and the laws that enforce that data, the laws that made that impact.
I have an N95 mask. I have latex gloves that I put on when I go out, and I take them off, throw them away. Okay. So
I have a 45 gun. Maybe that might work. No,
yeah, but that doesn't.
you can plug an N95.
Michigan guns don't listen to viruses. I'm sorry, they don't really care. You can bring all the guns you want to the Capitol. It will not make a difference.
None of that protesting helped.
I saw that. That's
all
insane.
it did was depress the doctors. Do you know that all of that protesting has caused the doctors to become very depressed? Did you know that?
Yeah, I mean, at best. But
I don't want my doctors depressed.
Okay, well, we have seen Dr. Ratner. Okay, part of it's the problems that we have in leadership. Part of the problem is the medical community not stepping up, and part of it is actually our community. In other words, the American culture. Okay, in and of itself, which is a culture of rebellion. Because let's face it, all our ancestors came over from somewhere because they rebelled, except for maybe the Native Americans. And how well did they do? They got smallpox, and we eradicated them. Think about that one. Okay, the thing is, so we come from a hereditary nature of rebellion, and it just doesn't work well against a virus. So the virus,
generation.
yeah, we're like, hey, we want our freedoms, but
well, there's also another point to remember about this. We don't just have freedoms to do things; we have freedoms from things. Remember FDR's freedom from want, freedom from hunger sort of speech. And I'm getting emails and direct messages on Twitter from people about the government can't do this; it's illegal. Congress passed a law in 1796 on quarantines. In 1826, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the use of quarantines. This is before the germ theory of disease. Upheld the use of quarantines as a proper exercise of the police power of the state. And when people show up to a demonstration brandishing military-style assault rifles, that's not free speech. That's terroristic intimidation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, not a constitutional scholar, but
and posted over and over and over. Thank you.
But see what I think, David, is what's going to happen is that since we're reopening, or whatever they call it, the economy, or people are going to disregard this, that we're going to be in for another month of really some pretty bad health situations are going to take place in June. In other words, it's going to get worse in June. The only thing I think that can save us is that the heat does have a factor in terms of mitigating viruses. And that may take place in July and August. Okay, by that time, we just got to see what's going to happen in September or October, because by October, it'll come back with a vengeance, because the U.S., our culture is not designed to do well with viruses.
And here's some things, and this is what we talked about from day one with some of the doctors that were kind enough to be coming on our show since all of this began. And they're really, really experienced doctors. But this whole virus is still unknown, and probably will be for more than a year or two. Thinking that we can come up with a vaccine like that, that's not the right mental state of mind. We have to learn how to figure out how to live with it and treat it. And we're already hearing news, excuse me for saying duh, but we're saying, oh my gosh, well, people, we've got a third series of the virus coming out, the third strain. It's just going to keep happening. So I think what we need to do is stop spending our money on things that are just not going to happen.
Right. I think they've found more than 24 variants of this virus already, which isn't surprising. But there are a lot of Ankit had his hand up for a while, and I missed it. He didn't say something.
Yeah, we have to hear from 1,300,000,000 people, 1.3 billion people.
I have a question for David. That there's a news going on YouTube, and a lot of WhatsApp videos are also circulating. That US and China had a trade deal in December. They have signed a deal, and in that deal, there is one point which is added at the last moment, which mentioned about pandemic. Do you have any idea about that?
No. No, I don't. I'm sorry. I don't. Probably one of the things I should keep up with, but there's a limit. Even though I get up at 4 or 5 in the morning, there's
And
a
you know,
limit.
I got that news from multiple sources from different countries, and it says that China have, at the 0 hour of that contract, they just added a line which is about pandemic, and that says that there would not be any change if there is a pandemic.
Okay. I wasn't aware of that. Both Reuters and the Times of India are probably much better sources on that. The Times of India is often right on top of things faster than anybody else. They must have a large staff around the country, or they pay very close attention.
But I have a video. I have a video as well. I'll share you offline, so we can just have a look and let's see if we can discuss on that.
Yeah, David, what's your next book going to be on? Pandemics or viruses?
Well,
or
the next book is supposed to be my proposal for a whole new tax code that is doable in the 21st century because we have a digital economy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have a 19th century tax code.
Thank you.
And we need it's damaging our economy. It's taxing some businesses heavily and others not at all. It's actually a profit center, as I proved years ago for.
Mm-hmm. Donald Trump is keep trying to get a hold of it.
I wish Donald would still call me at home as he used to do often, but since he got to the White House, he hasn't rung me again.
There you go.
Anyhow, I'm sorry.
There's one more thing. Which is going around that before pandemic. A lot of countries or superpowers, maybe UK, US, and countries like China, they might not be trusting each other on some platform, and they might not be trusting on some other platform because there is a lot of friction going around. But what happened after pandemic or during pandemic? Are we able to trust each other in terms of politicians between different countries? Because I see there's a different ball game going on where who is on which side and who is winning. What do you think?
I think pandemics historically have been transitory events. I can't find any evidence that the 1917-1920 pandemic that killed Donald Trump's grandfather had any lasting effects. In fact, I asked one of my 8 grown children today, do you remember growing up hearing anything about, because of that, this is how it shaped your life? And no. We had the 57-58, minor pandemic. We've had in this century MERS, SARS, swine flu. I think these are transitory events, but government shouldn't treat them as transitory events. This should be a wake-up call that we've got 7.8 billion people now, not the 1.5 billion we had a century ago. We were going to have more events like this. So we need to have more stockpiled goods. We need to replace those periodically so we don't end up, as the U.S. government did, with a lot of rotted masks. A lot of what government needs to do is boring stuff, making sewage plants run, making water plants run. We need to recognize that, and we need to make sure that our government anticipates these things, which our government did before Trump. Barack Obama was apparently just absolutely scared out of his socks by what was the potential of the swine flu. And his administration then began doing some things that should have been done a long time ago. But I would be very surprised there's a long-term lasting effect. There are going to be some effects. I have a son who's a truck driver. He points out to me that, yes, he'll have work, but there'll be so many more people looking for truck driving jobs that's going to push wages down.
Right. Right.
So he makes, $60,000 a year or something. That's going to shrivel.
Yep.
People who work in airlines, the airline industry itself is saying it's going to be a decade, they believe, before they get back to the level they have now. So there'll be big long-term economic effects for this. And some people, probably Nick and Kimberly and me, if your income isn't affected and your expenses have plummeted, as mine have,
mm-hmm.
You're going to come out the other side of this if you don't get sick with a stronger balance sheet. Maybe your investments will be worth less, but if you didn't sell, the 1,000 shares of X company you had are still 1,000 shares.
Right.
And so the effect on lower income, lesser educated people who do manual labor type jobs in America, service jobs, that's going to be horrible for them. Right. And it's going to lead to enormous pressure for social change in this country. And I hope one of the things it leads to mm-hmm. is, this is where I think the Democrats are being idiots, absolute idiots. They should pick up the mantle of universal no out-of-pocket healthcare and say, we're going to take this off the back of small business. And people are going to feel free to leave your company and go somewhere else. You're not going to have the risk. You're not going to have the paperwork. You're not going to have the annoyance, because we're going to go to a new system. It doesn't have to be Medicare for all, but a universal no out-of-pocket care system. Or as Donald Trump himself said to me 30 years ago, healthcare should be like the roads. When you need them, you just use them.
And healthcare, not insurance. Okay, people.
There's no need for insurance.
Healthcare, not insurance. This is what I never understood. The
Insurance is risk spreading and risk shifting, and there's no reason to have health insurance. I must say, however, even the systems in Europe have some health insurance components, but that's because they just haven't been willing to go full in, no out-of-pocket care, and you need to do in that dental care, because we're learning more and more over time that poor dental care is related to heart disease, lung, liver disease, etc. But the cheapest and most effective way to do it is on a universal basis, and probably to finance it off a non-progressive tax. You could do it as a tax on food. You can do it like the Nordics do on a value-added tax. But the reality is that once you eliminate the very few outliers, there are a few people who will live to be 90 years old and not literally ever have a fever their entire lives. They will never be sick. I know one of those people. When he got a old age condition and I was told, get out to see your mentor, he's going to die in 3 weeks, he hung on for 9 months. On the other hand, we have people like Donald Trump's grandnephew that are $1 million a year medical cases the day they're born for the rest of their lives. Throw out those very few outliers, and the difference between what Nick and you and I will spend on healthcare in America, bupkis. Right. So let's just take advantage of mass purchasing power. And when I hear somebody say, well, how would we pay the doctors? You know, corporate America figured out how to pay people a long time ago. Government knows how to pay people. They don't seem to have any trouble hiring police officers in Chicago and Los Angeles and school teachers in Seattle. We figure these things out. What does it take? Yeah. And economic theory tells us you pay the lowest price necessary to attract and retain the talent. A rule we violate only in the case of CEOs of publicly traded companies, where the job seems to be to bid up the price as high as you can.
It happens in stores also.
Yes.
But see, what happens is, David, and this is a problem that I've seen in the United States. My wife has told me that too. And both of us have masters in tax. My wife has her master's in tax from USC. Mine was from University of Denver. And I've been teaching at Northeastern University's graduate tax program for 10 years now. But one problem that we have is, unfortunately, a lottery system in the United States. Winner takes all. In other words, if you happen to be that sports figure who's just a little bit better than everybody else, you make 14 or 30 million a year. But if you're a little less, then you make 25, 35,000. And so what happens is the winner takes all the bananas and everybody else is left with peanuts at best. And that's been our economic system for, I don't know, the last 30 plus years since I think since Dwight Eisenhower, who used to have a 90% tax on people like that, was eliminated by your friend Ronald Reagan, who decided to and we saw that in 1981 with ERTA, the Economic Recovery Tax Act, where all of a sudden this huge 70% marginal tax dropped down to like 28% overnight. And so what happens is it created a winner-take-all economy, and we've had that ever since.
Yeah, the day that Reagan signed that law, I was covering the LAPD, not crime, but the LAPD itself, or the LA Times. And I was driving near LAX airport, and they came on NPR radio, and they were doing a live thing about it. And I said, gee, if only my father were alive, 100% disabled veteran dad, I could go and tell him I'm now going to pay taxes at the same marginal rate as the Rockefellers.
That's right. I mean, but that it's been that way ever since. And so what has happened is we've skewed where was it? The top 1% own 70% of all the financial assets in the United States.
I mean, actually, they own 90%.
Well, the top 10% own 90%. Yeah. And the real problem is the average American who doesn't know it. They're basically busted with nowhere to go, and the tax system has kind of done that over a 30-year.
No, that's been the argument in my book Free Lunch and a lot of other stuff, that the reason that we have this inequality, there is some inequality created by people like Bill Gates who invent a better mousetrap.
He won the lottery.
Yeah, and you know, I'm all for it. If you can, in the competitive marketplace, come up with a better service or a product and make a lot of money, good for you. Yeah. I just want to make sure that we collect all our taxes from you. We don't let you defer your taxes till you die and then let you give it to a foundation with the government not collecting anything.
Sure. Well, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, under current law.
I mean, the private foundation is the way out of having to pay any federal state tax.
I did a statistical anomaly in the IRS data from 1961 that lets us measure the top 398 taxpayers. And for 24 years, we got a report on the top 400. So statistically, it's immaterial. And what I showed was that from 1961 till the last year they did this, 2014, the tax rate of the top 400 taxpayers fell by well more than half. The tax rate of the bottom 90% of Americans went up 20%, and that's before counting Social Security increases, which are even more. Yep. And the after-tax gain was something like, I'm doing this from memory, but I think it's $36 to one or $78 to one after tax. Mm-hmm. And then we have companies and people who back in 2002, did a front page story showing that some corporations were making a profit off the tax. The Times got all these complaints. What crazy person am I? That's ridiculous. And then Congress did the biggest study the Joint Committee on Taxation has ever done, 1,800 words, 3 volumes, and showed that not only was I right, but it was worse than I said, and something I predicted there also turned out to be true. The Times, of course, wouldn't let me put a prediction in the paper. But I said, I predict to you, if we could ever see the internal records of Enron and GE and other companies, they would refer in emails to their tax departments as profit centers.
Yep.
Enron not only did that, they had a stamp.
Yep. Well, I mean, in Microsoft's home office, when I was up in Seattle, they had 400 tax attorneys working there. 400. Now, what do you need 400 tax attorneys? Well, they're supporting... And Eric Sveinbald, the guy who's a professor at USC, the Double Dutch Irish sandwich, which he writes extensively on. Right. Well, the Double Dutch was done by Apple, Microsoft, all the big corporations. And when I tell my graduate students, they're going like, huh, what's that? I said, well, we're taking advantage of the Irish Treaty in the United States, corporate America. But what also happens is not only what we have is a concentration of wealth in very few corporations and frankly, very few individuals, which give them enormous amount of power to the point where Facebook, and I'm screaming about right now because I get too many correspondents go back and forth. That's their complaint. I talk to too many people. And you know what they do, David? They shut me down. I mean,
they
automatically midstream, I get shut down by Facebook. Seriously. In other words, I'm getting shut down by Facebook all the time. Not because I'm saying anything bad or wrong. I just talk too much. Which, if people know me, that's not a surprise. Yeah. Okay, and I'm going like.
I want to address something that David brought up just a few minutes ago about changing the tax reform. How can explain this so that other viewers can understand this? Because not everybody understands the difference and everything. But how can that help us economically come out of the crisis that we're in right now?
So one of the things that's going on is. Many corporations, not all by any means, it depends on how you're situated, but many corporations and many individuals qualify for tax deals under which they earn money today, but they pay the tax 30 years or more from now. And that is the equivalent of the government loaning you tax-free, interest-free, loaning you interest-free the amount of the tax that you owed. So if you owed $1 million, and you didn't have to pay it for 30 years. The government just loaned you $1 million with no payments due for 30 years. Now go forward 30 years. Inflation has eroded the value of the $1 million. And you, by investing that money, can pay your $1 million tax. And depending on your rate of return, you can have anywhere from $2 million to $1 billion if you earn a high enough rate of return. And government is starved then for revenue. So it borrows more money. That crowds out other kinds of spending. Government doesn't invest in the future. Where I live in Rochester, New York, a new book by 2 MIT professors says we are the #1 city in America to revive the economy of the country because of all the high-tech and diversified knowledge that we have in Rochester. We have more students per capita than Boston, Cambridge. And to do that, the government would need to spend money, as it did in the 50s and the 60s, pre-Reagan, on science. The space program at one point was more than 1%